It was night, darker than I had ever seen before, and the air was thick with the stench of smoke and fear. I remember my hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of the rifle pressed against my chest. My heart pounded so loudly that I thought the enemy could hear it beating through the silence. The battlefield was no longer just a place of war, it was a graveyard waiting to claim the living. Around me, the cries of wounded men pierced the night, mixing with the thunder of artillery that shook the ground beneath our boots. I could feel the dirt clinging to my skin, taste the bitterness of gunpowder on my tongue, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Hate was no longer an idea, it had a face, and it was staring right at me. I had been trained to fight, to follow orders, to believe that the enemy deserved nothing but death. But nothing, no training, no words from commanders could have prepared me for the raw, unrelenting fury in the eyes of the soldier who found me crouched behind that ruined wall. His weapon was pointed at me, his finger tight against the trigger. He didn't see a boy far from home. He didn't see a human being. He saw only what years of hatred had told him to see, an enemy to be erased. My throat tightened, and in that second, I truly believed it was the last breath I would ever take. That night, as the moon bled faint light over the ruins, I learned how close death can come when hate rules the heart. It wasn't just bullets or bombs that almost killed MIT. It was something far darker, something that still follows me even today. Before I begin to tell you the full story of that night, I want to ask something from you who are listening right now. This memory I'm about to share is not just mine, it belongs to everyone who has lived through war, everyone who has seen hate so close that it almost swallowed their soul. And to make this journey even stronger, I would love for you to leave a comment below and tell me where you are watching this from. Which country, which city, let me know. Because every time one of you shares where you are, it reminds me how far we've come since those days when the world was divided by walls of hatred and fear. I'll be reading your comments, and I want you to know that your presence here means you are part of this testimony, part of the reason I'm telling it at last. Now, let me take you back to who I was before that terrible night. I am an old man now, my voice rough and my hands weak, but in my mind, I am still that boy who once believed life would be nothing but family dinners, laughter, and the sound of children playing in the streets. Before the war came, my world was small but safe. I had a father who worked long days to keep food on our table, a mother who sang softly while she cooked, and dreams so simple they almost seem foolish now, to grow, to love, to build something of my own. But the war stole those dreams before they even had a chance to take root. The story I'm about to tell is not a tale of glory. It is not a tale of heroes or medals. It is a confession of memory I've carried in silence for decades. I share it with you now, not to relive the pain, but to remind all of us what hate can do when it grows unchecked. And so, as you listen, remember, this is not just history. It is a warning. I was not always a soldier, nor a man shaped by the horrors of war. Once, I was simply a boy with dust on his shoes and laughter in his chest. I grew up in a quiet town where the streets smelled of bread from the bakery in the morning, and where children chased each other until the sun fell behind the rooftops. My world was small, but to me, it was everything. My father worked as a carpenter, his hands calloused but steady, always building something out of nothing. My mother had a voice that could soothe even the worst of storms, and I still remember how she would hum while preparing dinner, filling our little home with warmth. I had dreams, 2 dreams, of becoming a teacher, maybe traveling one day to see the world. But I never imagined the world would come to me the way it did, carried by the shadow of war. The first whispers came like rumors in the wind, men talking in hushed voices about soldiers marching, about borders tightening, about neighbors disappearing overnight. I was too young to understand it fully, but I could feel the tension building like a storm pressing against the walls of our town. My parents tried to shield me from it, hiding their worry behind forced smiles. But even a boy could hear the sharpness in their voices late at night. And then came the day everything changed. The day war wasn't just something whispered, but something that walked right into our lives. I remember standing in the street when the first military trucks rolled through. The ground vibrated under their weight, and the smell of oil and steel filled the air. Men in uniforms stared down at us as if we were insects. Some children cheered, thinking it was a parade. I didn't cheer. I felt something twist in my stomach, a fear I didn't yet have words for. That was the moment innocence began to slip away. Soon after, posters went up on the walls. Loudspeakers barked messages about duty, about enemies, about sacrifice. The language was always the same. They are the problem. They are the danger. I watched as neighbors who had shared meals with us became strangers overnight, accused of being spies or traitors. Shops closed. Food grew scarce. The laughter of children faded from the streets. And one by one, the men of our town disappeared, summoned to serve. My father was too old, but I was not. I was only 17 when the letter came. Its words heavy as chains. I was to report for duty. I can still see my mother's tears soaking the envelope, her hands trembling as she pressed it against her chest. My father stood silent, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. I wanted to tell them I was brave, that I would come back. But the truth was, I was terrified. I was a boy asked to become a weapon, and I didn't know how. That night, I packed the little I had: some clothes, a photograph of my family, and a wooden cross my father carved for me. My mother kissed my forehead, her lips warm against my cold skin, and whispered, "Come back to us." I didn't answer, because I didn't want her to hear the doubt in my heart. Training was not what I imagined. They stripped us of everything human, reducing us to numbers, to uniforms, to machines designed to obey. The instructors shouted until their voices were hoarse, drilling hatred into us with every command. "Your enemy is not human," they said. "Do not hesitate." But at night, when I closed my eyes, I didn't see enemies. I saw faces like mine, boys like me, pulled from their homes and pushed into a war they never asked for. Yet each day, the line blurred more, until I began to wonder if I would even recognize myself when it was over. The first time I held a rifle, it felt heavier than it should have. The wood was rough against my hands, the metal cold, lifeless. "This is your life now," one of the officers barked, "and it may be the only thing standing between you and the grave." I wanted to drop it, to run back home, to bury my face in my mother's arms. But I couldn't. The war had already taken me, and there was no turning back. As weeks passed, I hardened, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Hunger gnawed at us. Sleep was a luxury, and fear became as natural as breathing. But what I remember most is the silence before the battles began. That silence was not peace. It was the weight of thousands of hearts pounding, waiting for the order that would send us into chaos. And then, the first battle came. I will never forget the sound of bullets tearing through the air, sharper than lightning, faster than thought. Men screamed, some calling for their mothers, some calling for God. The earth shook beneath explosions, dirt and blood mixing into a smell I would never escape. I crouched in the mud, gripping my rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white, unable to move, unable to think. That was the moment I realized this was no story, no training exercise. This was death, and it was everywhere. I don't remember pulling the trigger the first time. I only remember the recoil, the jolt that ran up my arm, and the silence that followed. When I looked up, I saw a man fall, his face twisted in shock. I had ended his story, and mine would never be the same. From that day on, I carried not only my weapon, but the weight of every life it took. That was the day everything changed. I was no longer a boy. I was a soldier, and though I survived that first battle, a part of me had already died. But what I didn't know then, as I stumbled through smoke and ash, was that hate itself was waiting for me on the horizon. A face, a moment, a night that would test not just my body, but my very soul. The night when hate almost killed me had not yet come, but it was drawing closer with every step I took. War has a way of stripping you down to your core. You arrive as one person, and, within days, the world you knew disappears, replaced by a new existence where death walks beside you at every step. After that first battle, I thought I had seen the worst of it, the noise, the smoke, the cries of men falling around me. But the war was only beginning to open its jaws, and soon I would find myself swallowed whole. The marches began. We moved like shadows across ruined fields, through towns where windows gaped like broken teeth and walls leaned as if they were too tired to stand. The smell of ash clung to everything, seeping into our clothes, our skin, even our dreams. At night, we huddled in ditches, the sky burning with distant fires, the ground trembling from artillery strikes that never seemed to stop. Sleep became a fragile thing, broken by sudden orders or the sharp crack of rifles in the dark. Yet somehow, in that nightmare, bonds began to form. There was Jacob, a tall, quiet man from the north, whose eyes never betrayed a single thought. He was the kind of soldier who seemed untouchable, but I later learned that every night he whispered prayers into the dirt, begging for his family's safety. Then there was Emil, a boy no older than me, whose laughter somehow survived the battlefield. He would tell stories about his village, about fishing in the river with his brothers, about chasing girls in the summer fields. His voice reminded us that there had been a world before all this, and perhaps, though none of us truly believed it, a world waiting after. We clung to those fragments of humanity as if they were rations, but war was relentless. Each village we entered was more broken than the last. We saw homes turned to rubble, churches burned, and faces hollow with hunger and fear. Some civilians hid when they saw us, others spat curses under their breath, their hatred clear even in silence. And can you blame them? To them, we weren't boys forced into uniforms. We were monsters, symbols of their suffering. Every time I caught their eyes, I felt the sting of shame pierce deeper than any wound. The first real firestorm came on a gray morning. Our orders were simple: advance through the forest, clear out enemy resistance. But nothing about it was simple. The forest was alive with death, every tree a hiding place, every shadow a possible end. The air cracked with gunfire, and branches shattered above us, raining splinters and leaves. I remember pressing myself flat against the ground, the earth shaking as shells landed nearby, and hearing Jacob's voice shout, "Move, or you'll die here." I ran, my boots slipping in mud, my lungs burning. Around me, men fell, some screaming, some silent. Emil was beside me, his face pale but his grin still there, as if daring death itself to touch him. He shouted something I couldn't hear over the chaos, and then he was gone, disappearing into smoke and trees. For a moment, I thought I had lost him, but he emerged minutes later, dragging another soldier, whose leg was torn open. Blood soaked the ground, and yet Emil kept running, his determination fiercer than fear. That was the first time I saw courage in its rawest form, not medals, not speeches, but one boy refusing to leave another behind. We managed to pull the wounded man to cover, and when the officer barked at Emil for disobeying orders, he simply shrugged. "What good are orders if we forget we're human?" he said. That line has never left me. But war punishes mercy as much as it does cruelty. Later that night, after the forest had quieted, after we counted the bodies and whispered the names of those we'd lost, Emil sat by the fire, his hands shaking. He wouldn't speak. He just stared at the blood still on his uniform, as though it had stained his soul. I realized then that even the bravest among us could not escape the scars. The weeks blurred into each other, one battle bleeding into the next. Hunger gnawed at us, our rations shrinking until we fought over crumbs. Water was often taken from filthy streams, and sickness spread through the ranks like wildfire. Yet through it all, camaraderie kept us alive. Jacob shared his bread when I had none. Emil taught me how to find warmth in laughter, even in a frozen trench. Others told stories of home, of wives and children, their voices breaking as they remembered. It was those moments, the human ones, that gave us the strength to march into fire again and again. But there were darker moments too. Orders came that chilled my blood, to burn, to destroy, to take what was not ours. Some obeyed blindly, others hesitated, torn between duty and conscience. I remember one old farmer, his hands raised in surrender, his eyes filled with a plea for mercy. He was unarmed, yet one of our officers ordered him executed as an example. The shot rang out, and the man crumpled to the ground. I can still see his face. That night, I could not eat. I could not sleep. I wondered if I had already sold my soul by standing there, by not stopping it. But what power did a boy have against orders carved in iron? Every day, The line between right and wrong blurred further, until all that remained was survival. Yet deep inside, I clung to a hope that I could still choose humanity, that I could still be more than just another cog in the machine of hate. That hope was fragile, and the war tested it constantly, pressing me closer to breaking. Then came the night I can never forget. We were stationed on the edge of a ruined town, the streets filled with rubble and silence. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that warns you something terrible is coming. Emil sat beside me, fiddling with a piece of string, trying to make me laugh with some silly trick. Jakob sharpened his knife, his eyes scanning the shadows. I remember thinking how strange it was that even in the quiet, we could feel the presence of death creeping nearer. That was the night when hate truly revealed itself, not just in the orders we received, not just in the battles we fought, but in a moment that would forever change the way I saw the enemy and myself. Hate was no longer an idea spoken through propaganda. It had a voice, a face, and it was about to step out of the darkness and stare me down. And when it did, I would discover just how close I could come to losing not only my life, but my very soul. Hate is not born in silence. It grows, fed by words, sharpened by propaganda, and carried on the breath of men who believe they are righteous. I had seen it in posters, heard it in speeches, and felt it in the orders that stripped mercy from our hearts. But nothing could have prepared me for the night when hate finally stepped into the open, staring me down, pressing its barrel against my chest, and nearly ending me right there in the ruins of a forgotten town. That night, I saw hate given flesh, and it nearly killed me. The evening began in stillness. Our unit had been ordered to secure what remained of the town, a place once filled with markets and music, now nothing more than shattered stone and smoke. The air reeked of burnt wood, and the silence was so heavy, it pressed on our lungs. We moved cautiously through the streets, rifles raised, every doorway a possible ambush. I remember my boots crunching on glass, the sound impossibly loud in the emptiness. Emil was ahead of me, whispering something about how the place felt like a ghost had claimed it. Jacobi followed behind, his eyes sharp as ever. We thought the town was empty. We were wrong. It happened in seconds. Gunfire erupted from the shadows, shouts filled the air, and chaos swallowed us whole. Bullets tore through walls, dust choking us as we scrambled for cover. I dove behind a crumbling wall, pressing my back against a stone as fragments rained down. My heart slammed against my ribs, and my fingers clutched my rifle so tightly they hurt. All around me, men shouted orders, screams echoing as soldiers fell. And then I was alone. I don't know how I got separated, only that suddenly the world narrowed to one ruined alley, smoke curling through the air, and footsteps closing in. I raised my rifle, ready, my breath shallow, and then I saw him. He was no older than me, maybe younger. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with dirt, but his eyes burned with something I had never seen so closely before. They weren't just filled with fear or anger, they were filled with hate, pure and unrelenting. He raised his weapon, pointing it at me, his hand steady as if guided not by training but by something deeper. And in that frozen moment, I understood. To him, I wasn't a boy. I wasn't a human being. I was an enemy, a target, the embodiment of everything he had been told to despise. Time slowed. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead, the way his finger tightened on the trigger. I could feel my own body betray me, my hands trembling, my chest heaving. For the first time in my life, I believed death was certain, not because of the bullet, but because I saw no recognition of humanity in his gaze, only hate, sharp as steel, cold as winter. I thought of my mother in that instant, her voice singing in the kitchen, my father's hands, steady as he carved the wooden cross I carried in my pocket. Emil's laughter in the trenches, Jakob's quiet strength, all of it, gone in the blink of an eye, erased by a boy whose hatred had consumed him completely. And then something happened that I cannot explain, not fully. He hesitated. Maybe it was the way my rifle had slipped, pointed not at him, but toward the ground. Maybe it was the fear in my eyes that mirrored his own. Or maybe, just for a fleeting second, he saw me not as an enemy, but as another boy trapped in the same nightmare. His finger wavered on the trigger. That moment of hesitation was the only reason I am here to tell this story. But the danger wasn't over. A noise erupted behind us. Shouts, more footsteps. Jakob appeared, his rifle raised, his voice booming as he barked my name. The boy turned his head just slightly, and in that instant, instinct overrode hesitation. I lifted my weapon. My finger pressed the trigger. The shot rang out. He fell, his body crumpled, his eyes wide with the shock of death. For a moment, I couldn't move. My rifle felt heavier than ever before, as though it had become a chain binding me to what I had done. Jakob's hand gripped my shoulder, pulling me back into the fight, shouting for me to move, to live. But I wasn't listening. My mind was locked on that boy's eyes, how they had burned with hate, and how in the end, I had answered it with the same violence. That night haunted me more than any battle, because it wasn't just about survival. It was about what hate had done to us, how it had stripped us of choice until all that remained was kill or be killed. I had seen hate's face, and I had seen my own reflection in it. The truth was undeniable. In that moment, I became the very thing I feared. Emil found me later, sitting alone, my hands still shaking, my eyes staring at nothing. He tried to speak, but words failed. Instead, he sat beside me in silence, his presence enough to remind me I was not entirely lost. Jacobi, too, stayed close, though he said nothing. Maybe he knew that no words could erase what had happened. As the days passed, the war ground on. Battles came and went, and each one carved deeper scars into my soul. But nothing ever felt the same after that night. I no longer saw the enemy as faceless shadows. I saw that boy. I saw his eyes. And I knew, with a certainty that crushed me, that he had probably carried the same dreams I once did, dreams of family, of peace, of a life stolen by war. The war was teaching me something cruel. Hate does not only destroy those it targets, it destroys those who carry it. That boy's hate nearly killed me, but my response to it had killed something inside me as well. And yet, I had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep surviving. Survival became a burden heavier than any weapon, because every step forward meant carrying the ghosts of those left behind. But even as I drowned in guilt and fear, small sparks of humanity still flickered. Emil's laughter, though quieter now, still found its way into the nights. Jakob's prayers continued, whispered into the dirt, stubborn against despair. And sometimes, in the silence, I dared to believe that maybe there was something worth holding on to. Maybe hope still existed, fragile as it was. Little did I know, the war was not finished with me yet. It had one more lesson to deliver, one that would test whether I could still find light in the darkest night. Because as we marched deeper into enemy territory, carrying our wounds and ghosts, the thin thread of hope we clung to would be stretched to its breaking point. And when it did, I would face the choice that defined the rest of my life. War takes, and takes, and takes again. It strips away your youth, your innocence, and even your belief that the world can be good. After the night when I stared hate in the eyes and felt it almost swallow me whole, I thought there was nothing left inside me but emptiness. The boy I had shot stayed with me like a shadow that refused to fade. I carried him in my dreams, in the sound of every gunshot, in the silence between battles. And yet, amidst the despair, life has a way of forcing its way through the cracks, like a flower pushing through rubble. That fragile hope became the one thing that kept me from drowning completely. The morning after that encounter, our unit marched onward. The air was heavy with mist, the ground frozen beneath our boots, and our breath rose like smoke as we moved. Every step felt mechanical, as if my body moved out of habit while my mind lagged behind. Still trapped in that alley with the boy whose life I had taken, Emil tried to speak to me, telling jokes that normally would have drawn a smile, but I barely heard him. Jakob, silent as ever, walked on my other side, his presence steady, like a wall that wouldn't crumble no matter how many shells hit it. That day, we passed through a village unlike the others. It wasn't completely burned, though it bore scars of conflict, windows shattered, roofs sagging, doors hanging open. But what struck me wasn't the damage, it was the people. They came out cautiously as we entered, their faces pale, their clothes ragged. Mothers clutched children tightly. Old men leaned on canes, and their eyes followed us with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. We had been told again and again that civilians were dangerous, potential enemies hiding behind innocent faces. Yet what I saw in those villagers wasn't hatred. It was hunger. It was despair. Our orders were clear. Take supplies, secure the area, move on. But there was little to only scraps of bread, some thin blankets, water that tasted of rust. As soldiers tore through homes, searching for anything useful, a young girl stumbled toward me. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, and her hands clutched a piece of bread so small it barely filled her palm. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, not with hatred but with something worse pleading. She lifted the bread, offering it to me. I froze, my throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. In her gaze, I saw not an enemy, not a stranger, but my little sister, though I had none. I saw the family I might one day have, the innocence I had lost, the future this war threatened to erase. I couldn't take it. I couldn't let her give away what might be her only food. So I knelt down, shaking my head softly, and reached into my own pack. Inside were a few crumbs of rationed bread and half a potato. Pitiful though it was, I pressed it into her small hands. Her eyes widened, her lips parted in disbelief, and for a brief second, a spark of joy lit her face. She whispered something I didn't understand, a thank you in her own language, before she ran back to her mother. That moment changed me. It was as if the universe had whispered a reminder. There was still humanity left, even here. Even now, the war could strip us of almost everything, but not the choice to show kindness. That fragile act, so small it could have gone unnoticed, lit a fire inside me that refused to die. I clung to it like a drowning man clings to driftwood. Of course, not everyone approved. Jacob didn't say a word, but his eyes lingered on me, unreadable. Emil, however, smiled softly. Later that night, as we sat by a fire, he said, "That's the man you're supposed to be. Don't let them take that away." His words carved themselves into me, giving me strength I didn't know I still had. Days turned into weeks, battles into nightmares, and yet that memory of the girl stayed with me, guiding me through the chaos. Even when shells exploded around us, even when comrades fell beside me, I remembered her smile. It reminded me that life wasn't only about death, that the world still had something worth fighting for, not the war, not the orders, but the possibility of a tomorrow where children didn't have to beg soldiers for scraps of food. But hope in war is fragile. It flickers like a candle in the wind, easily extinguished, and the war was relentless in its attempt to snuff it out. I saw men break under the weight of guilt, turning cruel to protect themselves from feeling. I saw villages burned without reason, families scattered, and hatred rekindled in every corner. And yet, somehow, that fragile hope persisted. Perhaps it was Emil's laughter, though fainter now, or Jacob's steady prayers whispered into the dirt. Perhaps it was my own stubborn refusal to let go of the image of that little girl. Then came the night that tested us all. We were sent on a mission deep into enemy lines, tasked with holding a position that seemed impossible to defend. The ground was frozen, the sky black, and the silence was thick with the promise of blood. As we dug into our positions, Emil sat beside me, his breath fogging in the cold air. He handed me a scrap of paper, a letter he had written to his family, but had no way of sending. "Keep it," he said, "in case I don't make it back. Someone should know who I was." I didn't want to take it, but he pressed it into my hand, his eyes steady. "Promise me," he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. That letter burned in my pocket all night, heavier than any weapon I carried. The battle that followed was like nothing I had seen before. Fire lit the sky, bullets rained like hail, and the screams of men echoed into the darkness. We fought until our arms ached, until our ears rang with the endless thunder. Emil fought beside me, fierce and unyielding. But when dawn came, his laughter was gone. He lay among the fallen, his eyes closed, his face pale. I shook him, called his name, begged him to wake, but he did not. Jacob pulled me away, his grip iron, his voice breaking as he muttered, "He's gone. We can't stay." I carried Emil's letter in my hand, soaked in dirt and blood. My hope faltered then, dimmed by the cruel reality that even the brightest sparks could be extinguished. But as I looked at his still face, I remembered his words. Don't let them take that away. Even in death, Emil's voice guided me. That fragile hope had to survive, because if it didn't, then none of us had any reason to go on. And so, I clung to it, even as grief tore through me, because I knew the war had one final lesson to teach me, one final test to deliver before it ended. I didn't yet know what it would be, but I felt it coming, like thunder rolling on the horizon. The war had already taken my youth, my innocence, and now my dearest friend. But it wasn't finished. It would soon force me to decide what kind of man I would be when the guns finally fell silent. I am an old man now. My hair is white, my back bent, and my hands tremble when I lift them, no longer steady like they once were. Yet when I close my eyes, I am 17 again, standing in the mud, with a rifle that felt heavier than my own body. The war has never truly left me. It lingers in my dreams, in the silence of the night, in the moments when the world grows too quiet, and I hear echoes of voices that time has stolen. But as I sit here, telling you this story, I realize that the war did not only shape who I was, then it shaped who I became. When it ended, I expected relief. I expected joy, celebration, a flood of life returning to the world. But what greeted us was silence. Towns were rubble, families broken, fields burned. Men returned home, but not as the boys who had left. Some carried medals, others carried scars you could not see, and many carried both. I was one of them. I walked back into my home with a body still whole, but a soul fractured. My mother wept when she saw me, clinging to me as if I were a ghost returned. My father placed his hands on my shoulders, his eyes filled with pride, but also something unspoken, a recognition that the boy he had raised was gone. I tried to live as if nothing had happened. I tried to laugh again, to work, to build a future, and in some ways, I did. I married, had children, built a family of my own, but every smile I gave was shadowed by the faces of those who never came home. Emil's laughter still rang in my ears. Jacob's prayers still echoed in the dirt, and that boy, the one whose eyes burned with hate, remained etched into my soul. Hate had almost killed me that night, and though I lived, a part of me died with him. For years, I stayed silent. People wanted stories of glory, of victories, of brave men who stood tall. They did not want to hear about the nightmares, the guilt, the fragility of hope. But silence is its own prison, and I carried that weight alone for too long. That is why I speak now, why I tell you my story, not for pity, not for forgiveness, but because hate is not gone from this world. It lingers, waiting, feeding on division, whispering in the ears of those who believe their pain justifies cruelty. And I have seen what hate can do. I have seen it in the eyes of an enemy, and I have seen it in the reflection of my own actions. Hate consumes, it destroys, and if we let it, it will swallow us all, just as it almost swallowed me. But I also learned something else, something Emil taught me, something the little girl with the bread reminded me of. Hope, even when fragile, is stronger than hate. It may flicker, it may bend, but it refuses to vanish completely. It lives in acts of kindness, in laughter shared, even on the darkest nights, in the choice to see a human being instead of an enemy. That is what saved me. Not the rifle in my hands, not the orders I obeyed, but the moments when I remembered what it meant to be human. So what kind of man did I become? Not the boy I once dreamed of, not the soldier the war tried to forge. I became a man who carries ghosts, yes, but also a man who understands the value of peace more deeply than words can express. I became a man who knows that hate is a poison, and that every small act of compassion is an antidote. I became a man who will spend the rest of his days warning others of the dangers I once lived through. To those of you listening now, wherever you are in the world, know this: the war I lived through is over, but the battle against hate is not. It exists in words, in actions, in the way we choose to treat one another every single day. You may not hold a rifle, you may not stand in trenches, but you face your own battles, moments when hate tempts you, when anger tells you to strike, when division whispers that someone different from you is your enemy. In those moments, remember me. Remember this story. Remember that hate nearly killed me, and that it will not hesitate to destroy you too, if you let it. As I sit here, looking back on the life I've lived, I do not measure it in battles won or lost. I measure it in the small things, the bread I gave to a little girl, the letter Emile entrusted to me, the prayer Jacob whispered when all seemed lost. Those fragile sparks of humanity are what endure. They are what make a man, not the war, not the hate, not the pain. So I leave you with this. Guard your hope. Protect it fiercely, even when the world seems determined to extinguish it. Because, in the end, it is not hate that defines us. It is what we choose to hold on to when everything else has been stripped away. And for me, that choice was fragile, but it was enough. Even now, as an old man with little time left, I hold on to that fragile hope. It is the reason I can speak these words to you today. It is the reason I can look at my children, my grandchildren, and believe that perhaps the world they inherit will be better than the one I knew. Hate almost killed me, but hope, fragile, stubborn, beautiful hope saves me. And it can save you too.